This is Nick Woodward's review of A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, published Halloween 2020, October 31st. Directed by Wes Craven, starring Robert Englund, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, Amanda Wyss, Nick Corey, Ronnie Blakely, and Johnny Depp. One dark night, a young boy awoke from his sleep in his family's apartment. His mother was working and his older brother was in the other room. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread take hold of him, and he felt an unnatural pull to the window of his bedroom. Outside, he noticed a man in a red and green sweater with a tattered fedora walking down the street. Hypnotized, the boy studied the man in the red and green sweater, unable to look away. Suddenly, the man stopped and slowly turned his head as if he knew the eyes of the young child were upon him, slowly shifting his gaze upwards. The man in the red and green sweater locked eyes with the young boy, turned around, and began to walk towards the front door of the boy's apartment. He watched in horror as the man approached the apartment's door. Unable to control himself, the boy screamed as he had never screamed before. His brother came rushing into the room frantically, asking him what was going on. And then it was over. The man wearing the red and green sweater never came for him, but young Wes Craven was forever haunted by the nightmarish figure he saw that night. Years later, Wes Craven was a young college professor who stumbled across a news article in the Los Angeles Times about among refugees in the 1970s who had suffered panic attacks and night terrors of the horror and atrocities they had been subjected to during the genocides that raged during the Vietnam War. Craven read about one individual teenager who had refused to sleep for several days due to fears of the nightmares he would suffer from when he slept. Concerned, his parents did all they could to get him to sleep. And once the young man finally did go to sleep, his parents were startled at the sounds of his screaming. They rushed into the room to find their son had died in his sleep. Upon investigation, they found a coffee pot hidden in his closet and several bottles of anti-sleep medication. Craven now had all the fuel he needed to create one of the most iconic and terrifying villains ever to claw and slash their way across the silver screen, Freddy Krueger. A young girl named Tina Wyss finds herself running through a boiler room-like maze, being pursued by a shadowy figure in a green and red sweater, his right hand adorned with a razor-fingered glove. Tina awakes with her nightgown slashed and covered in sweat. The next day, Tina tells her boyfriend Rod, played by Corey, her best friend Nancy, Langenkamp, and Nancy's boyfriend Glenn, Johnny Depp, all about her dream and her mysterious attacker. Tina's friends admit they are also having nightmares and that they are also being haunted by the same shadowy figure, who they come to know as Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. As the nightmares they all have begin to result in their real-life demise, Nancy searches for the truth about who Krueger is and why he has targeted her and her friends. Desperate, Nancy turns to her father, Police Lieutenant Don Thompson, John Saxon, mother Marge Blakely, for answers. Nancy learns of her parents' sins and commits herself to ending Krueger's reign of terror once and for all. Robert Englund and Wes Craven felt that Freddy Krueger needed attitude, unlike Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, who never spoke or uttered a single word. Freddy Krueger taunted and toyed with his victims, while Freddy wouldn't fully transform into the wisecracking killer he's best known for until A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors in 1987. This original iteration was still full of malice and venom that brought a personality to the character that had not yet been seen in horror films. Englund not only showed he could be sharp-witted, but that he also could carry himself with the bravado of an Old West gunslinger. Englund walked as if his razor claw was a six-shooter on his hip, and as if Freddy's nightmarish boiler room was his saloon. Englund's iconic burned look was created by the film's makeup artist, rearranging the pepperonis on his pizza one night and then applying the effect to the actor's makeup. Englund, of course, already known for his work on the acclaimed science fiction television show V, became a horror icon and would go on to portray Freddy Krueger in 7 sequels. A Nightmare on Elm Street was released in 1984 and ranks as one of the greatest horror films of all time. The film rejuvenated the slasher genre, and it was not long before Jason, Michael, and Leatherface returned with their respective franchises. Freddy's influence also opened the door for newcomers Pinhead and Chucky, among many others. Thus began the second wave of slasher films in the second half of the 1980s, and audiences ate it up. Freddy Krueger became a household name, and even at the time became adored by children too young to see the film. Nightmare on Elm Street was so successful that not only did it spawn a full-fledged franchise, but it launched New Line Cinema Studios. If it were not for Freddy, Peter Jackson would never have been able to give us the Lord of the Rings trilogy. New Line Cinema has since forever been affectionately known throughout Hollywood as the house that Freddy built. Craven graduated from his on-again, off-again success as a filmmaker to become a staple of the horror genre, and he went on to make not only great standalone horror films, but also give birth to another one of the most popular and successful horror franchises of the genre, Scream in 1996. Craven would weave in and out of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise over the years, but it was always the films he was most involved with that were clearly the best. Sadly, Wes Craven passed away at the age of 76 in 2015. He may be gone, but the impact Craven had on the horror genre will never be forgotten. He gave us the ultimate nightmare. He gave us the ultimate nightmare, and for that we thank him, and we'll forever remember him. That was Nick Woodward, Halloween 2020.